Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
About 15 years ago,
yes,
Airbnb, over the last 15 years, it's really established this new market for short-term real estate rentals. It made it easier for property owners to take on renters by helping travelers find alternatives to hotels. It also handled some of the transaction details. Don't forget about the cleaning fee.
Yes.
It was a boon for many property owners who suddenly had a new source of income to help pay off their mortgages. They could fund renovations. And Carol, Airbnb added more than 1 million active listings just last year, while also posting record profit. It's doubled, or more than doubled, its market value to $97 billion since 2020 when it went public.
Listen, we've all stayed in Airbnbs. I've stayed in multiple ones. I know people who have been hosts. I mean, it's pretty
You can
amazing.
throw Vrbo into this too.
And Vrbo, right? It just feels like this industry has exploded. But it turns out, Tim, getting harder to be an Airbnb host, especially in the United States.
Yeah, Natalie Lung is Bloomberg News tech reporter, and for Bloomberg Businessweek, she writes about how property managers are looking for ways around Airbnb. She joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Natalie, why is it getting harder to be an Airbnb host in the U.S.?
Yeah, so there are a lot of factors over the past 15 years, maybe most recently the pandemic. The pandemic has caused a lot of people in the US to travel domestically during that time, and people rented like rural, like cabin houses, larger vacation homes, and that caused a lot of hosts to pile into the market and set up homes there. And now coming out of the pandemic, people are returning to cities, going overseas again, and so some markets are becoming saturated. So that's one thing where,
Who could have seen this coming?
When
everybody was quitting their jobs to like become Airbnb hosts.
Everybody.
Get those low interest rate mortgages because they had X number of Airbnb rentals that everybody was going to because they couldn't travel internationally.
Exactly.
Who could have seen this coming?
I mean,
I'm sorry.
To state the obvious.
Yeah.
All right. So where are we, and what does that mean for Airbnb?
Yeah, and so I went to this conference in April where there are like 600 people talking about what to do.
And this was not an Airbnb organized
it was
conference.
Not.
What type of conference was it?
It was organized by an online influencer who has himself done some of these midterm rentals, as they call it, like 30 plus days rentals, where they find people who are relocating for a job temporarily, and they live months to months.
The organization finds the person, or the person finds the
So it's the
home?
host, an individual mom and pop person, like someone with a 9 to 5 who's just trying to call up your local, hospitals. This guy, this online influencer, Jesse Fouquez, just found an opportunity there, contacting the HR department of his local hospital in Modesto in California and saying, do you have travel nurses who be coming to my city all the time, and do they need houses? And he's telling them, I have like 5 properties available, and you can house them all there. And that's how he got things rolling. And now he's marketing this strategy to 600 people.
It's super smart.
It is really smart. It does, though, raise the question that, the whole idea of a marketplace like Airbnb taking that, what analysts and investors call the take rate, is because they have this platform that they argue is safe because it has these reviews. It has a way that you can get insurance if something doesn't work out. It has a history of who has stayed there, how they've rated it, and then there's a way that you can, I don't want to say arbitration because that's like a legal term, but there's a way that you can use the platform to resolve differences between the host and the person, because let's face it, this stuff doesn't always go smoothly. So how do people do those things?
So part of this strategy, there is a risk to it, and maybe the startup cost is higher. You need to vet the person who's staying at your home much longer, but the payoff is that you won't have to do that often because they're staying on a monthly basis. And so, a lot of these people vet people very carefully, and at least for some who are catering to relocating employees, they have the employer as like a safeguard.
Carol, you got to make sure that they're not going to rent it for 30 days and then put it on Airbnb.
Could you imagine?
Like the most read story, one of the most read stories in the last hour, the so-called wolf of Airbnb, who we talked about a little earlier.
Who did things that weren't really on the up and up. Does Airbnb like this change?
So Brian Chesky has addressed some of this book direct movement in 2021, and he said it's not like a big number that's happening. A lot of these people are still individuals who rely on Airbnb because they have just probably one rental. But obviously, with the 300,000 listings on like there's a platform called Furnish Finder who has gained a lot of traction after New York City put down their Airbnb regulations, and people are scrambling to find another platform. And so we see this momentum going on, and to the hosts, it's like just diversifying their marketing channels in a way.
Because they'll stay on Airbnb, but also they'll have this as an option.
Yes.
Okay. So how much are they able to save, or how much more are they able to make by not giving that take rate to Airbnb?
It depends on your scale. So this online influencer / organizer, for example, he's now making $80K a month in profit. He manages 17 rentals.
Does that not include? Does he sell the course too?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yes. Okay. So the course makes $1 million a year.
Oh.
It's $6,500, and he attracted like 60 more signups after the conference in April. Wow. And there was an attendee whose credit card got declined as well because the course is a lot of money.
Well, I am curious, like how you're thinking about kind of how you said it's a small part of Airbnb's business. Is that correct?
Yes. And like not everyone does this. Yeah. Like not everyone has the time to vet everyone so carefully. And for a lot of mom and pop hosts who just want to fill like a weekend or two to supplement their income, Airbnb is still a choice for them.
I just remember somebody in our neighborhood who had some properties and would rent them out Airbnb, but then was also then looking to be like rented out to corporate people because they felt like
that pays so much more.
Pays more. Yeah. It was just a whole different vibe, and I almost feel like this is taking that to the like next level.
Yeah. So one host I talked to, she complements both strategies, so short term and long term. So maybe there's a week where you can't find someone to fill it. They will try to still go on Airbnb. She takes like 50% of her bookings still on Airbnb, and but on the side, she has this property management business herself as well. So people are getting creative.
It's a really fascinating way to do this. We've been spending time talking about Airbnb, but you also, right at the beginning of your story, you talk about Vrbo. And that's, vacation rental by owner is what it stands for, but Vrbo is the way we say it. Is Vrbo having the same challenge too?
So they are a bit different in the sense that they have not ever allowed like rooms to be listed. They just do whole home rentals. Yeah,
that's how they try to differentiate themselves in their advertising and marketing.
Yeah. So like I guess for a lot of hosts who operate on there, there are a lot of people who list on Airbnb, Vrbo, and their own website. So it depends what your property is. But for Airbnbs, a lot of like people would think of that as their first avenue, and sort of that's why we're seeing this sort of diversification here.
Is this expected to grow?
Yeah, I mean talking to the influencer, like he's seeing more students, and there are other enterprise software companies who are seeing people making their own websites. So like from that we can see sort of that influence still going on. So
Chesky has talked about this for years, as you mentioned, but is this something that after doing this reporting and seeing this growing movement, Airbnb investors should be concerned about? It should be on their radar?
In a way that we can see the company is actually doing more to try to support hosts. They have made changes to how, let's say, helping hosts price their properties well, and also trying to weed out some of the lower quality listings, as they say. So making a better experience for everyone, so keep everyone on the platform.
Well, check out this story. It's in Businessweek, available on the terminal and at Bloomberg.com. Natalie Long, Bloomberg News tech reporter, joining us here in the studio.
It's the boss.
Who doesn't like a little Thunder Road?
Who doesn't like a little Bruce Springsteen? Excuse me.
Well, the Stone Pony.
Yes.
You hear those three words, and if you're like me and many others, you think of one man.
Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah. And make no mistake.
As a good Jersey girl, I can say that.
You can say that. The boss certainly is a huge part of the Stone Pony, but as our next guest writes in a new book, it was just out last month, it's not just a place for Springsteen and his fans, Carol. It's a place that has become a, quote, international rock pilgrimage for all types of musicians. And despite the fact that once renowned venues like CBGB and the Cavern Club, which is where the Beatles started, those are gone. The Stone Pony, where Bruce got his start, it's still here.
Nick Corasaniti is a political correspondent for the New York Times. He's the author of a new book, I Don't Want to Go Home, The Oral History of the Stone Pony, and he joins us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. So someone who knows all about it, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Since you do cover, politics.
Oh, yeah, that's where we're going.
We need to kind of start there, if you don't mind.
Sure.
How are you thinking about this environment? How are you thinking about democracy right now, considering the developments of the past weekend?
Well, it's interesting how that's actually a word that's being thrown around a lot, especially from the right. President Trump's campaign, Speaker Johnson, Senator McConnell, they all had statements within an hour of Biden's letter being posted saying that this is undemocratic, you're disenfranchising the 14 million voters who cast primary ballots for Biden, and they cast it for Biden, not for Biden-Harris. And that, this was an anti-democratic move. Now, it's a bit of a difficult message for them to carry, just given everything that happened in January 6th and, a lot of voting laws that have been passed by Republican-led legislatures. But it's certainly something that's starting to catch on with voters. There was a poll in the Washington Post about 6 weeks ago about the issue of democracy and how important it was to voters, and it was more than 60% said it was extremely important. Now, the only thing that came close to that was the economy. So this is vitally important to voters.
Right.
Yet they actually said in these 6 swing states that they trusted Trump a little bit more than Biden to handle those issues. So it's something that's been defining for our politics for the last 4 years. President Biden made his last major address before the midterms on issues of democracy, and then Democrats did very well in the midterms. Right. So it's something that's very much at the forefront of the conversation as everything's happening with Vice President Harris, Democrats coalescing, and all of that.
But was there an alternative to this sort of coronation that we saw over the last 24 hours because there are around 100 days left? Was there an alternative apart from, so many, I don't want to call them kingmakers, but truly, you had people in the last 24 hours on the Democratic side coming out, and not everybody, and endorsing Kamala Harris in a way that makes it so she is the nominee without actually having appeared in a primary.
The practical nature of where we are in the cycle right now makes it really hard for anyone other than Vice President Harris to kind of step up.
Okay.
Because what the Biden campaign has is staff, infrastructure, field offices, $90 million in the bank, a fundraising apparatus that, she says that she's raised $86 million, I think, which is a staggering number, since the announcement 24 hours ago. No one else could do that. If someone who's extremely popular, thought of as a next generation Democrat, like Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, Josh Shapiro, they'd all be starting from scratch. Sure, they might be able to inherit some of the apparatus, but it'd be really, really hard. And that's just, we're talking about the practicality, right? The politics of trying to leapfrog the first black woman vice president, and who's also going to now be the first possible, standard bearer for the Democratic Party. To try and take that away in the modern coalition would just be really politically challenging.
Do people know what democracy means?
I think that's a really interesting question that Washington Post poll explores. It's become so polarized and politicized that people ascribe democracy to different issues that aren't necessarily just about voting, just about trying to overturn an election, trust an election, break into election machines, everything that, when I write about it, that's my focus. But you see people thinking about democracy just as if the other side wins, it's a mortal threat to the future of the country. Whether you're a Republican or Democrat, it's kind of been going in this polarized way. And so I think that the issue has certainly been politicized and polarized and muddied in a way. But at the same time,
it's simple and pure, right? It's a government of all of us.
Exactly. Well, there is even another debate where you hear, especially on the right, more we're a republic, not a democracy, which would take the rest of this program to fully unpack. But it's definitely something that I think is being effectively muddied. But again, when you have a Democrat, say, who goes back to the original messaging of this from post-January 6th, spring of 21 with all the voting laws, current President Biden really did a good job of that in the fall of 22 before the midterms, and it did break through. So you wonder if there is going to be a refocus on that. We're already seeing January 6th ads again hitting the airwaves, right? So I think this is going to be at the forefront.
You cover voting rights and democracy, and we're going to get to the Stone Pony in a bit.
Promise.
We got a great chunk of time with you, so we got plenty of time. Do you think is it fair to say that voting has changed just in the 2 years since the midterms, or in the 4 years since the 2020 election? Like, have the rules in certain states changed?
Oh, significantly. And
has it become easier or harder to vote?
It depends on where you are, and it depends on who you are. There's been, efforts to limit mail voting, especially. And so if you're in a state where they changed the mail voting rules and you were once a mail voter, there's some things that you now have to be aware of. There's efforts to say, like, let's say in Wisconsin, there's been this whiplash about using drop boxes, which is where you can bring an absentee ballot, drop it off just like a mailbox. A lot of voters love that because you're not bound by whether a voting office is open or not. Let's say you can't go during work hours, you're a shift worker, you can only go at, say, 6 a.m. or 8 p.m., you drop off your ballot. It's easier. For the midterms, the Wisconsin Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. So all of those voters couldn't do that anymore. And then the newly constituted Wisconsin Supreme Court, which now leans Democratic, even though they're nonpartisan, it was once conservative. Now they're putting them back, right? So maybe voters can go use that. So that's just one example of like the shifts. Now, and there's also the shift in the wholesale voting behaviors that has really kind of defined everything since the pandemic. Voting by mail used to kind of be a Republican advantage.
Yeah.
In Florida and Georgia, like in Georgia where it's become such a flashpoint where Republicans are limiting it, it was the Republican governor who brought it to Georgia. George W. Bush and Karl Rove were absolute masters of the vote by mail and using the mail. There's a whole book written about it by Sasa Eisenberg. So it's interesting to see the patterns behave, the politics change, and then, there's a lot of laws that have been changed.
All right, speaking of a book, how does someone who covers voting rights and democracy at the New York Times...
Come on, you need a break after doing that. You got to write about something completely different.
Write a book about the Stone Pony.
So in between the 16 and 20 elections, I was the New Jersey correspondent, of which I'm from, loud and proud New Jerseyan.
Amen.
And I grew up going to the Stone Pony, and I grew up, going to Asbury Park to see punk music. And when I was going in the 90s, in the early 2000s, Asbury was very different, to put it lightly. It was kind of dangerous. It was a ghost town.
Right?
It was very rough. There was abandoned buildings everywhere. There was this structure that was like an abandoned skeleton of like a apartment complex that had been failed multiple times. It just like, you couldn't believe it that on the Jersey Shore, this finite like Gold Coast on the East Coast, that this one town could just be so desolate. And that was my experience, but punk, we don't care. And that was our stage. So we went. And then due to covering politics and moving to DC and going to college away from New Jersey, I hadn't seen Asbury for a while until I came back in 2017. And I was like, what happened? And so...
That's a long time.
It's a long time. It was like from about like 2006, probably 2005 to 2017. And a lot changed. And I as the Jersey correspondent, I was still a political reporter. So I still had to cover, the new Governor Murphy, Cory Booker's eventual presidential campaign. That was still like my main assignment, but I could still cover some of the culture. And I wanted to tell this story about this town that bounced back, because especially having covered the 2016 campaign, we learned about, for every Asbury, there's 100 failed small towns, right? Yeah. And I wanted to tell that story that got at the spirit of what Asbury is. And it's a music town. And so I didn't want to just be like, it's got a hotel and, some new restaurants and investors. And well, that's all important. And you have to tell that. That wasn't the spirit that felt important to me. To tell why this town's renaissance is important. And so I was like, hey, the Stone Pony's still there, somehow, magically, in like open defiance of the expected lifespan of a rock club. Let me use that as my narrative Trojan horse to tell the story of Asbury Park.
I want to get right back to Nick Corasaniti, political correspondent for the New York Times, also the author of the new book, I Don't Want to Go Home, The Oral History of the Stone Pony. Nick, the boss, Bruce Springsteen, he writes an introduction. You got him for the intro. But it's not just Bruce Springsteen who you spoke to for this book. Steve Van Zandt, Niels Lofgren, the Jonas Brothers, all three. Are there more than three Jonas Brothers? The Jonas Brothers are three.
In the band, there's just three.
Okay, in the band, there's three. Jack Johnson. It's an incredible lineup. John Popper, Russell Crowe as well, Patti Smith. Talk to me and talk to us about how you were able to get all these incredible people to speak to you for this.
Well, I mean, from the political world, you're kind of used to just slowly pulling threads to get more people to talk to you. You know, one leads to another. Hey, do you know this person? Can you help introduce me to this?
You got Chris Christie. I mean, that one makes sense because you're a political reporter.
I did.
You got Chris Christie.
That was actually while he was campaigning for president. We did a video interview.
Just slide it in.
Yeah, we did a video interview, and that was like my New York Times thing. And then we shifted to lunch where we talked about the pony. And then I went to his event later and wrote a story off that.
Which interview was longer?
The pony one. Okay. He's a big fan, clearly. But it's, I also think what was interesting to me was how many people were willing to talk. And I think it just speaks to the weird, draw and allure that the Stone Pony has for so many artists, in part because of the spirit that like Springsteen, Southside, and Stevie kind of like imbued in the place. Mm-hmm. So Tom Morello calls them the good ghosts that are in the pony. And I think so many artists feel that. And it really is kind of like, it works for so many different genres, right? Like Patti Smith felt that, and she felt such a connection to the club because it felt like one of those clubs that helped her establish herself in New York. The same way that like Mike McCready felt the guitarist from Pearl Jam, felt an amazing connection there because it reminded him of his origins when like crowds were on top of you, and you could see everyone in the crowd so clearly that you could read their beer labels and what that felt like as a musician. And so, when people, there's a common phrase that like you play small rock clubs when you're on your way up and when you're on your way down. Mm-hmm. But I think the pony kind of cuts across that a little bit because it creates that bond with a lot of artists that they want to get something back that they've, lost as they've moved up, and they still play it. Russell Crowe's a great example. He was playing with his band 30 Odd for Grunts that he had for forever. And he booked a tour right before Gladiator comes out, when he's, sexiest man in the world, one of the most A-list celebrities of all A-list celebrities. And he had booked Madison Square Garden Theater, not the full garden, but still like a 6,000 person venue. And then the Pony, it's about 600. And so once he's a megastar, they were like, well, you got to cancel the Pony because you're in the Radius now. And he was like, no, I'm going to cancel the Garden. I don't need that. I want to do the Stone Pony. And like that and he has an interesting story in the book how he was actually going to play in New York on September 10th, 2001. So playing at the Pony actually might have, because he was staying at a hotel right next to the towers, might have, saved his life. But just the fact that he gave up 5,500 fans to play at the Pony, and what that would feel like, I think speaks to how so many people feel about the place.
Are you not entertained? Yeah. I had to say that. I'm sorry. I just had to say that.
Good.
I mean, how did it come to be, though? Like, I think we just not take it for granted, just assume it just came to be. I don't know. We assume it was Bruce Springsteen. How did it come to be?
Well, it opened in, kind of a desperate time for Asbury Park. It had experienced pretty traumatic race riots a few years beforehand, and that caused some pretty big flight. But what that also did is, as Stevie Van Zandt says so lyrically in the book, it left it to us rockers, rogues, mystics, and renegades. And we'll always hear him saying that, in my head. And he just says it so effortlessly because he's just such a lyrical person. And that created this scene of musicians that, you wouldn't expect to find on the Jersey Shore. You find it in Motown, in Nashville, and New Orleans, but then for some reason you had it in Asbury Park. And once Springsteen starts taking off, people start paying attention to it. And then Southside Johnny and the Asbury Juke start. Mm-hmm. And they kind of really help create this sound of music. It's rock and roll with horns and gospel and soul and R&B. And it was a sound you hadn't heard elsewhere. And it was dancey. And people wanted to dance to rock music again, right? Like the whole guitar slinger thing, it kind of made people watch music. You were dancing again, and people loved that. And Bruce loved that. So he starts coming, people start learning about it. There's a famous broadcast of a Southside Johnny show in 76 on 11 radio stations across the country, and that wasn't done that much. So now there's a scene and a sound, and everyone wants to start coming. And then when Bruce becomes really famous, it also becomes his home. And, he says in the book, the things of celebrity that would bring you to New York and LA and all the things that normal people would do didn't interest me. What interested me was where I was from. Yeah. These people mattered to me, and this place was interesting to me in sustaining that scene. And so when you have a guy, imagine right now, like if Taylor Swift picked a 600-person club and just showed up there on Tuesdays, people would be camping out, right? Like you wouldn't even be able to get within a 10-block radius. He was that famous after Born in the USA. So that he was still doing it created this spontaneity that lives on there. And it's it's maybe Bruce will show up, but also it's maybe like I'm seeing, a metal band and maybe Zakk Wylde shows up, or I'm seeing a punk band and maybe I'm seeing Taking Back Sunday and the guys from Brand New come out, or I'm seeing, Midtown and Brian Fallon comes out.
Because it just continues.
It's the spirit of the place in like the truest sense of the word, and it really, I think, has just stuck in a way that like you can't take it out, and that's what keeps artists from coming back.
You write in the book about the transformation of Asbury, and I'm wondering if the Stone Pony will live on into the future because it has changed. The area around it has changed so much.
It's a great question. I think everyone in Asbury recognizes that the Stone Pony is the kind of spiritual beating heart and soul of Asbury. And so as the towns come back in a kind of very organic way, they've done a great job at preserving that. There's new condos, the $6 million condo. There's new development. It's a money town right now. They're building condos everywhere. But I think they understand that you can't touch the pony. You have to leave it there. And you kind of have to leave the summer stage there, too, because it's become such a part of town. And, like, it's like this mini festival feel every night. And the sounds echo across the boardwalk. So, like, even if you don't have a ticket to say... I was just at the Bouncing Souls at the Pony on Saturday. Even if you have a ticket, you were 3 blocks away on the boardwalk. You could hear, them playing "Hopeless Romantic," and so
that's pretty cool.
You just can't remove that. If you do, it's not Asbury anymore, right? It's just another wealthy beach town.
2 bouncers did this, right?
Exactly. It started by 2 bouncers who were just like, I want to do my own thing. And they did, and it's had its ups and downs. It's closed twice, and it's certainly not a bouncer-run bar anymore. It's backed by major industry support, including Live Nation. But it persists.
Yeah, I mean, listen, everybody talks about Asbury Park. I feel like it's just something so much more. Nick, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Nick Corasaniti, he has a new book out. He's, of course, political correspondent for the New York Times. The book, I Don't Want to Go Home, The Oral History of the Stone Pony. This is really fun. Thank you so much. Good luck. This is Bloomberg.